is one of the most researched and studied relics in church history, and profoundly impacts many who encounter its mystery.
As a person of faith, looking at it through the eyes of faith, I don't think it can help but touch your heart.
Something that we can look on not only to bolster our faith in those moments of weakness, but also to deepen our faith and our appreciation, our intimacy with Christ.
Join Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry as they examine the science of the shroud through the lens of faith.
Really interesting scientific information that we didn't know about, like the pollen from all the different regions of the world. As the shroud traveled around, it picked that up. Some of the mites, things like that was really interesting to me. I mean, this made you really want to believe it a lot more.
It's impressive. Like, humanly, I don't think that is another level of love. It's not I'm gonna see people like, oh, I love you, I'll give you a chocolate. No. I'm giving you more than my life. I'm giving you my suffering.
Asking both experts and disciples, who do you say I am?
As far as who the man of the shroud is, as a person of faith and kind of reviewing the evidence there, it seems that a convincing argument can be made that it's Jesus of Nazareth.
Visit patchworkheart.org/shroud to learn more and get exclusive behind-the-scenes updates for your support.
The St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, present a podcast for divorced and separated Catholics.
Hello and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is Ann DeSantis, Executive Director, joined by our President, Mickey Kelly. Mickey, thanks for joining us again for this series.
Hi, Ann. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this has been an awesome series, and it's the 10 tips for after divorce for Catholics who've been affected by divorce and separation. And so we're already at episode 7. And during this episode, we're really going to focus on annulments. For those people who have been divorced, maybe you're listening to this podcast, you've been divorced for quite some time, and maybe that next step for you, if there's no chance of reconciliation in your heart, then maybe the next step is an annulment and finding out more. And on our website on nonatus.org, we do have a whole page there dedicated to divorced and separated Catholics. It's called For the Divorced. And on that page, it says, there's no doubt that divorce is a grave offense against the dignity of marriage, and it brings disorder into family and society. And then in big letters we have there, it says, but it happens. No matter your situation, you're not alone. We are here with love, prayer, support, and resources to help you find your way, take the high path, and gain emotional and spiritual freedom. And it goes on to say on our website that first and foremost, the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation offers ongoing one-to-one support. We offer free pastoral consultations, as many as needed, with one of our Mercedarian friars. This service is our main offering through SRNF. Do you have questions related to separation, divorce, or annulments? We recommend you schedule an appointment to talk with one of our friars who can listen, care, and offer pastoral support and answer your questions. And then on our website, it says to simply click below. So I just want to put that out there to you who are listening, that maybe one of those first steps, well, a very first step would be just listening to this podcast on this day. And another step would be to scheduling with us, because everything that we do is guided by the teachings of the Catholic Church. We follow very closely what the Catholic Church teaches, and so do our Mercedarian friars. Those are the religious order, the priests and the brothers who founded us. And they're the same way as we are as a foundation, because we're all one. We're together in this mission to bring hope and healing. And so make that appointment to talk to a priest and find out where you stand in terms of that. Now, Mickey, we've said on this podcast many times, because people ask us, how do you and I, Mickey, you and I know about divorce and separation? And I think one way we do is through the work that we do here, because we've talked to people, we have spent time listening to their stories. But one of the bigger ways that we know about this is that you and I are products of it ourselves as children of divorce. Your parents divorced when you were 10 years old. My parents divorced when I was 7, and both of our parents had gotten annulments. So I didn't know if you wanted to share a little bit about that, because you do know about that from your own family life.
I would probably speak to those that can totally relate to us and to the children divorce, and that is, it was sad. It was kind of heartbreaking. It was weird that you weren't seeing your dad like you were used to, like when you were growing up. And like the point you just made, it was that I was 10 years old. We were coming back from some kind of family gathering, and then we were told to gather around the dinner table, and that's where my mom shared the news that like my dad, they're getting separated and divorced. And I remember my sister taking it very hard, but eventually she she came to terms with it. I'll put it this way: we all came to terms with it, on our own. Like, came to terms with it on our own. I think it took me a while to finally come to terms with it. So, and it was, like I said, it was kind of sad. It was kind of heartbreaking. It was also frustrating because it opened the door to a really when I was going through a really sketchy stage of growing when I was in my preteens and adolescent years. And of course, by the time I was like in my late 20s, my mom finally decided to get the annulment, and that was it. And she was able to fill it out, no problem, and finally have her marriage blessed in the church. Same thing with with my stepdad. My dad wanted no part of it at all. Of course, he never moved on after divorce. Like, he's been a hermit for 20 some years. So I still get to see him and all that, but.
Well, I appreciate your sharings. I know you share very honestly, and to you, I just say it's a blessing for us and for me, a friend of yours working with you with this foundation, but also to our listeners, to those who are listening to your story and how that helps them. Whether they're those couples, we get a lot of those people who are the couples, but also adult children of divorce. But I've learned a lot about annulments, and I've learned a lot about healing. And what I would say that in my own experience, being the executive director now I've been with the foundation since 2017, so it's more than 5 years now since I've been with them and with all of you, is that sometimes the annulment does bring a healing, meaning that for people who are kind of like, it's been quite a while, maybe they've been thinking about it for a number of months or years or however long that's been, of the problems that they've been having, maybe a separation or a divorce. And when it seems that there's kind of like no light that's being shown in terms of, is this marriage going to come back together? Will there be a marriage? Will there be a relationship again? And if the signs aren't there, sometimes when people are able to do that, and I would say to those who are listening, you ask, what should I do? Like, what is the process? The first thing I want to say to you to do is to contact your pastor. If you're going to a parish, is that you need to contact your pastor and or your diocese, archdiocese, possibly your bishop, and get scheduled to do that paperwork. And I'm going to read to you some information about what an annulment really is. And I thank our former board member, Rose Sweet, who is really an expert in this whole field of helping Catholics who have been wounded by divorce and separation. Her website is rosesweet.com. Some of you already know her. In fact, she and I did a whole series also on 12 steps to find a new life. And that's on this very YouTube channel. You can listen to whole 12-part series with Rose and I. But what she says on this website, which is also one of her websites called catholicsdivorce.com, it says, what is an annulment? And I'm just going to read you some of what it says. It says, the formal term is a decree of nullity, and an annulment has become the common phrase. It's not to be confused with a civil annulment. It doesn't make your children illegitimate. It doesn't deny the love, affection, family ties, and other goods between you and your ex-spouse. It doesn't deny that you had a valid civil marriage. According to the Catholic Church, a valid sacramental marriage can never be broken. If the marriage is authentic, it has been, quote, caught up into and become part of the unbreakable marriage bond between Christ and his bride, that is, all of us in his church. He never breaks his promise. He never leaves us. No divorce ever. But for serious reasons, some people just aren't capable of entering into a valid or sacramental union. Like some people can't drive a car even though their feet reach the pedals and they really want to drive, and the church recognizes with the same love and justice and desire for mercy as Jesus, that imperfect people enter into what are called attempted marriages, and that's in quotes. Despite good intent, something was seriously obstructive or missing that prevented the union from ever being able to rise to the level of a true marriage. There was, as the church says, a, quote, defective consent, and despite family, financial, social, sexual, and even partial bonds, there was no true marriage bond as the church understands authentic marriage. It can seem a jarring concept, but it makes sense when you stay open to the mind of the church and have someone help you understand. So I think that's really a great resource there. I'm going to give it to you again, and I want to thank the person who wrote that, as it was not myself. But on this podcast, we always point to those great resources that can help you and your family. It's at catholicsdivorce.com. That is actually Rose Sweet's, one of Rose Sweet's websites. And it's under, if you go to that, under common questions. So, Mickey, I didn't know if you had any comments about that. It was very well stated, wasn't it?
I agree, Anne. It was very well stated. In fact, Rose has done a tremendous job really explaining annulment, and she has been there herself, through thick and thin. And she has been an asset to us, when I first got involved with the foundation, of course. And she continues to do great work, in everything she does. In fact, just out of curiosity, I was just looking at the repertoire of books she wrote, and it's just really, it's really remarkable. And she also has a speaking schedule, of course, and there's no question she will be busy with the summertime, with all the conferences heating up and everything. So shout out to Rose. I hope all goes well, and God bless you in everything you do. But I look at annulments, it's, you just get another chance. At marriage, it's not like you're divorced, a death sentence. No. The annulment says, hey, I'm free to get married again in the church. It's not really that difficult, unless you make it difficult, of course. And it shouldn't hold you back. In fact, just recently, when Pope Francis came to the scene, he wanted to waive the fee requirements for divorce, for the annulment. And some of the dioceses have picked up on that. And hopefully more will do that. And let's face it, divorce is a cross for many people to bear. But I think in order for us to unite Jesus on the cross is to do what is right, and to get annulled. Because nothing should hold you back from God placing another man or woman in your life to marry and get that opportunity to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Sorry for the delay there too. And what I will say at what you said at that tail end is that being able to possibly be open to what God has in store for you. Not all people who get divorced and annulled wind up getting married again or any relationships. Sometimes that just does not happen. But I can say in the case that you're listening to on this podcast, which is Mickey and myself, both my mother and his mother went on to get married again. And my mother had another child too. So I have a sister from my mom's second marriage as well, my sister Jen. Shout out there too. And so annulments, for those people who have suffered divorce and maybe God has another plan, can bring some hope and healing there and new life. So just keep that in mind for people who are listening to this podcast about annulments. Now, I want to go on and just read the rest of what Rose has written here, which I think is also good for us to look at. She says in this writing here on common questions about annulments that maybe one spouse was married before and not free to marry again, or one was grossly immature, underage, under grave fear or pressure to marry, like a shotgun wedding, severely addicted, or permanently refused to remain open to the gift of children. These are areas that did not reflect the free, total, faithful, fruitful, and love of the bridegroom for his bride, and therefore do not reflect a valid marriage bond. For those who are both baptized, the bond is assumed both valid and sacramental, pointing to and becoming caught up into the mystical marriage until proven otherwise in a competent tribunal. And then it goes on to say that some people think it's too easy to get an annulment. It is not. Some have said, including recent popes, there are too many annulments in our country. They are right. Not that annulments are easy to get, but that too many people marry for the wrong reasons and with the wrong intent. Grace can certainly help us all, but far too many today fail to have the capacity for marriage as God intends. There is much more. This is a complex issue because marriage is a serious issue. Most Catholics, including some clergy, haven't been well informed on the truth about marriage, much less about annulments. But we hope to help remedy that through our materials. And I will say that for us too, through the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, through people like Rose Sweet and us, if you want to know more and what we can do, first ask God to give you an open mind and heart and check out our annulment section. Now, that's on Rose's website. Again, as I said, that is thecatholicdivorce.com. So be sure to check that out. And she gives a Bible verse and a catechism verse too here at the end of this, what I'm reading. It says, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And that's from Matthew 16:18-20. And then from the catechism, the church, after an examination of situation by the competent ecclesiastical tribunal, can declare the nullity of marriage. And that's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1629. So if you want to go to that number in the Catechism, you can read more about what the church says about annulments. But these are all great resources. Mickey, I want to mention what you talked about the idea of the payment too. And you're right. Some of our dioceses and archdioceses throughout this country are now offering to, not make people to have to pay the fee. So it is a good thing that our Holy Father has done, because one of those reasons that people give, or they used to give before, was that it was expensive, that they would have to pay a certain amount of hundreds or even more than $1,000, however much that would have been. But it's a very nice thing now that it's another reason that you don't have to worry, because if your diocese or archdiocese is offering it that, then you can get it for obviously a lesser price or nothing. So I think that's a good thing. The other thing I want to bring up is that we ourselves did a 4-part video series. It was a few years ago. It was back in 2018, but we did a 4-part video series with Father Matthew Phelan, who is now our vicar of the religious order that we represent, and Father Sean Bransfield, who works at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and is very knowledgeable with Catholic annulments. So we interviewed him for this 4-part series, and it's on our YouTube channel too. So if you go to Filii Nonnatus and you go to our playlist, there is the annulment series is there. It's a really good series. I mean, I would say that if you watch one at a time, you can just use a little notebook or something, take some notes, because Father Bransfield really answers all of those questions that people have about annulment. So Mickey, did you have any other words of wisdom from your own life or even friends? I know that you and I both have friends who have gone through divorces and maybe even considering annulments. Would you have any advice for them?
The first thing I would suggest you do is don't be afraid. I would say reach out to a priest. If there's one priest that refuses to help you, find the next one. Keep finding a priest until one that's able to work with you. And whether you are a child or a spouse that is going through this period, run to Jesus. Run to him. Pray. Be who you are and never give up.
Excellent advice, because with all of this, it takes time to pray, to discern, to learn. You know, this is all new territory. If you're listening to this podcast and thinking, you know, I'm just hurt. I'm hurt of what I went through. And maybe some of you might be listening and saying to yourself that you believe that you're still married in God's eyes. And actually, Rose Sweet does have something on her website on the catholicsdivorce.com, which goes through a lot of information. I'm going to read this too, because I do think it's good for us to consider some of this. She says that it can be a great sorrow when one spouse leaves. Sometimes the other determines to remain faithful to the marriage vows, regardless of the other's absence. Living a married life all by yourself is an extremely hard cross to bear, but one that can bear much spiritual fruit, such as, and she lists these reasons, I'm going to read them: giving public example of authentic faithfulness to your children and the community. Next is being a sign to all of the faithfulness Christ has for each of us. Next is creating an emotionally safe place for a spouse to return. And next, cooperating with grace to work out your own salvation and being a witness of obedience to the church teachings. Uniting the loneliness with Christ's suffering so that he can turn it into spiritual fruits. Now, she says there's some other things to consider. She says, such as that when married, and she puts it in quotes, when staying, quote, married might be staying stuck in bitterness or fear of moving on. Another one is struggling to accept the reality because of a disordered attachment to being married. Next is staying stuck in victim mode by continually referencing your, quote, abandonment. Next is falling into pride by constantly calling the departed spouse the adulterer. Next is falling into pride by constantly praying for the other's salvation. One heartfelt prayer is enough for God, she says. And next is refusing to accept the authority of the church tribunal. And then going on, I'll just read a little bit more and then we can discuss it. She says a competent tribunal, which is someone like what I discussed when Father Sean Bransfield came and talked to the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation. At the time, that was what he was involved with. A competent tribunal may have thoroughly investigated the marriage through the annulment process and found that the union to be one where both parties gave it their best, but it could only reach the level of an attempted marriage. And that was not sacramentally valid. And she says there is no shame in this. So let's unpack that a little bit, Mickey, because there's some people listening that might feel so terrible that their marriage did not work out. They feel awful. They blame themselves. They can't accept that this has happened. And maybe they don't, for that reason, they might not want to get an annulment or even look into it. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts, because you yourself and within your family, you've seen that happen, you know, the waiting to get an annulment, but then finally did go ahead and get it.
Yeah, and like I said, it seemed like the one thing that's holding people back from, and honestly, I mean, it's fear. And if we look at the fear that we have seen over the past few years, especially, you know, with COVID, you know, there are oftentimes I still people in church that or grocery store or whatever, I see them walking around with masks and I'm like quick to judge them. But honestly, you're not, like, your calling as a Catholic is not to judge people. And let's face it, we have been guilty of this many of times with our wording. And, you know, Jesus, when he was alive, when he did his ministry, He was around sinners. He was around these type of people that were not perfect at all. He didn't celebrate their sin. Instead, he called them to repentance. He called them to be his apostles. You too can accomplish that same feat if you know someone that has been divorced. And one of the great blessings, and I think it's been part of my healing, Anne, is being a part of the foundation. And it's really helped me a lot. And the fact that I could just reach out to some of these people saying, like, hey, I know it's like, from a child standpoint. And you'd be surprised how many did had a child or two from the marriage that is in need of help. And, we're much needed now more than ever. We can't lose sight, and we have to continue helping those who need that extra boost to seek to take that first step in healing from a bad marriage.
Yeah, excellent advice, really is. And I'm glad that you're working with the foundation as our president has helped you personally. It is really an honor to working with you, Mickey, I will say, and doing these podcasts and just some of our events, because you and I both have experienced the healing of working with other people and having been affected by divorce and separation. Because, like I said at the very beginning, both Mickey and I are children of divorce. And in that, I say, if we were true children at the time, right? Because we were very young when our parents divorced and got that annulment. At least I think I was pretty young when the annulment went through still. And you were younger, not quite as young as you were when they got divorced. But we do understand. And it's helped us and brought us healing by talking to people like you who are listening, those people who have been wounded by divorce. And I've heard so many stories, and I'm glad that our foundation can help people to get the help that they need to find out more about something like an annulment. I can think of one particular client that we had who came to us a few years back, who had been divorced for many years. It was more than 10 years, but did decide to finally do the paperwork for the annulment and got in touch with us over this last year and thanked us for our help, and also for Rose Sweet, because she helped this gentleman also along with this decision and how to go about it. So please do reach out to us and to one of our priests here at the foundation, because we offer that free pastoral consultation to help you think about these things, to help you make those decisions. Now, there might be some people listening who might be saying to themselves, guess what? I am already remarried and I did not get an annulment. And there is something on that same website, thecatholicsdivorce.com, that is addressed here. And this is all again from Rose Sweet in her writings. She says, I'm already married now, what? And she says there are usually two areas that remarried Catholics will want to consider after a divorce and remarriage. And it says having your new marriage convalidated in the church. And I'm going to read it because I think it's informational. It says, if both of you were free to, and it in quotes, remarry in the church and did, no problem. However, you may have remarried outside the church and now want to have your new marriage convalidated. The common term is blessed, but convalidation is much more than a blessing. It is an exchange of vows according to the church that makes it valid and elevates the marriage to a sacrament. Sacraments bring endless amounts of special and powerful graces that every married couple should have. One or both of you may need to go through an annulment process first, even if one spouse is a non-Catholic. Most any time that two adults say, I do, the church assumes there is a valid marriage bond. These issues need to be cleaned up. Don't be afraid of the process. Go to the annulment guide on this website. As I said, it's called CatholicsDivorce.com, and look at that annulment guide. Now, there's one more issue here. She says that dealing with blended families, and I'm going to read it. Step parenting is a special challenge, but it can be a special blessing as well. Second marriages fail at an extremely high rate, even Catholic marriages, because of many issues. The primary problem, the new family may be child-centered, not marriage-centered. Many parents, understandably, but inappropriately put their children first in a second marriage. Additionally, if the marriage is not Christ-centered, the struggles will be even more difficult. Put Christ first, then the marriage. gets good Catholic counseling if needed, and check out the Step Parent Guide for more help. And again, that is on that website, CatholicsDivorce.com. She also gives a Bible verse. It says, and they said, believe in the Lord Jesus and your household will be saved. That's from Acts 16:31. And the Catechism says, children owe their parents respect, gratitude, just obedience, and assistance. Filial respect fosters harmony in all family life. That's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2251. Now, I know that was a lot for me to read, but I thought it was important to read because this is an informational podcast for you. And now Mickey and I are both also in families where we have step parents. I have a stepfather. Mickey also has a stepdad. Let's talk about that too, for the children's side of it, because Rose is also saying that that's a blended family, and do have to recognize Christ in every marriage and in that whole family unit when there are step parents involved as well.
Yeah, as you pointed out, Anne, I do have a stepfather, and I'll put it this way, it was a slow development. My mom was like dating my stepdad. They were dating the time before the divorce was final, and like they're seeing each other on and off. Let me put it that way. And finally, when the divorce was final, they got married about less than a year after the finalization of the divorce. And there were times that like my dad was jealous of him, and they, like, one would walk out of the room when the other one would come in, or vice versa. Then I would say, when my brother got engaged, like, the hatchet was buried, and they started becoming buddies, to the point where a few years back, my dad invited my stepdad to go target shooting with my nephew at a gun range in the area, that's somewhere. And of course, he declined it, but he appreciated the invitation. They said on Wednesdays, when my dad takes my brother Dominic up for his guitar lesson, usually every week, my dad would take my brother Dominic up for his guitar lesson. He would stop in, have coffee, maybe some kind of cake or something that's left over, and just like talk about what's the latest going on, whether it's around the neighborhood or in the family, things like that, share memories, and they really enjoy, sharing a laugh with each other, So like I said, it was a slow approach, but in the end, they're starting to become likable to each other, which I'm very thankful for that.
Wow, that's amazing. Really is. Because, let's face it, when there is a divorce in a family, it's not easy. And for those listening, we do have that empathy, sympathy for you for the challenges that you've been through. But, God has a plan for your life. And that's really what this podcast is all about, is that, I've seen it happen before for those marriages where there was a need to kind of move on. It's been a long time. And the next step would be an annulment for them. Is that I have seen people be healed from the past and being able to move on, and maybe able to find a new relationship and have a valid Catholic marriage, just like your mom and your stepdad, and my mom and my stepdad as well, who have a valid Catholic marriage. They've actually been married now, going on, I think in a few years, it's going to be going on 50 years. So it's a long time that they've had that marriage, and it's a blessing. It's a real blessing to have that long lasting love that came into my mom's life, my parents' life. My father was also able to get remarried, and now that's another story. But I mean, he's passed away. But I mean, he had 2 other marriages after that, but both of his wives had died. But what I'm trying to say is that God writes straight with crooked lines, doesn't he, Mickey? I mean, sometimes we never know the direction of life. God always has his best will for all of us, no matter what the circumstance. And so for you who are listening, that's what we're here for. We're here for you, for the hope and healing, and offering that ongoing accompaniment, which is the way that we do our pastoral consultations, which are always free, everything that we offer. I want to ask all of you to go to our website at nonatus.org/forthedivorced. We have a whole page there. Mickey and I have done not only this podcast series, which we're not quite finished yet. This is called 10 Tips for Healing series. Rose Sweet and I also did a full 12-part series also on healing after divorce. So please go to that page and you can see that. And also all of those other resources, including a lot of her books. I mean, she's written countless books to help those affected by divorce, right? And we put them right on that page on the website. But of course, you can also just go to her website too at rosesweet.com, or even look her up on Amazon and check out all of her books there. She's also a Catholic coach too. So she does great work and really has zoned in on that whole idea of helping Catholics who are wounded by divorce. So Mickey, before we end our podcast here, did you have any final words of hope and healing to those who are considering an annulment?
The only thing I can really say is, I'll just reiterate something the point I made earlier. Don't let your divorce hold you back from another chance at being loved, cared for, in good times and in bad, for richer, for poor, and better, for worse.
We are still here. My apologies. We're still here. Mickey, thank you for those words of wisdom. Thank you to all of you for listening to this podcast and for joining us. Now, don't forget, every single month we premiere the first Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We are on the Philly Nonatus YouTube channel. We are also on Facebook at St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation. I want to thank our friends at Fiat Ministry Network for streaming our podcast all the time. They do so much for us. And our friend Bill Snyder, who is also a board member here, Patchwork Heart Ministry. He also streams our podcast on his page. Now, his website is patchworkheartradio.org. He's doing amazing work. So make sure you listen to all of his podcasts and subscribe, as well as fiatministrynetwork.tv, or simply just go to Facebook. We thank them so much. God bless all of you. And we will see you here next month for our episode 8 of our 10 tips for healing after divorce and separation. God bless.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation, visit nonatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com.
The Shroud of Turin is one of the most researched and studied relics in church history, and profoundly impacts many who encounter its mystery.
As a person of faith, looking at it through the eyes of faith, I don't think it can help but touch your heart.
Something that we can look on not only to bolster our faith in those moments of weakness, but also to deepen our faith and our appreciation, our intimacy with Christ.
Join Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry as they examine the science of the shroud through the lens of faith.
Really interesting scientific information that we didn't know about, like the pollen from all the different regions of the world. As the shroud traveled around, it picked that up. Some of the mites, things like that was really interesting to me. I mean, this made you really want to believe it a lot more.
It's impressive. Like, humanly, I don't think that is another level of love. It's not I'm like, oh, I love you, I'll give you a chocolate. No. I'm giving you more than my life. I'm giving you my suffering.
Asking both experts and disciples, who do you say I am?
As far as who the man of the shroud is, as a person of faith and kind of reviewing the evidence there, it seems that a convincing argument can be made that it's Jesus of Nazareth.
Visit patchworkheart.org/shroud to learn more and get exclusive behind-the-scenes updates for your support.